Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Science World's Arctic Voices online family event series, where today we'll be traveling with Parks Canada to the Yukon. My name is Dana. I'm the curator for our Arctic Voices feature exhibition here at Science World. And I'd like to take this moment to thank our presenting sponsor, the Royal Bank of Canada. I'd also like to take this time to gratefully acknowledge that Science World is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We hope that by you joining in our online family event series like this one, that you'll be able to deepen your own relationship and understanding of nature, similar to that of the First Nations. Let us welcome our featured guest for today from Parks Canada. Joining us all the way from the Yukon, broadcasting live, is Erin Jamieson. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Erin, perhaps it's most fitting if you can tell us a little bit more about the beautiful view behind you today. That is a little bit more about the Yukon and the place that you're broadcasting from.
Thank you. I would love to. So I'm speaking to you from Dakwakata, or Haines Junction, Yukon. I'm on the traditional territory right now of the Champagne and Asiatic First Nations, very close to the boundaries of Kluane National Park and Reserve, which also exist on the traditional territory of Kluane First Nation and White River First Nation. The park is actually cooperatively managed by Champagne and Asiatic First Nation and Kluane First Nation, as well as Parks Canada. So just outside my window is that amazing view. Oh my goodness. We can see the Kluane Ranges. These are a chain of mountains. They average about 2,500 meters or 8,000 feet tall. And beyond those mountains out there, even bigger, lie the rugged ice-filled ranges. Their peaks, their mountains get as tall as 5,000 meters plus, or 16,000 feet. The giant of this group is Mount Logan, which is 5,959 meters tall, or 19,545 feet tall. Amazing. It is the highest mountain in Canada, the second highest peak in North America. And, well, these ice field ranges that we're looking at, these ice fields in general, they're a legacy of the last ice age. We have the world's largest non-polar ice fields here in Kluane National Park and Reserve. Massive quantities of snow just keep accumulating as moist Pacific air moves over the St. Elias Mountains. Valley glaciers radiating out, tempting hikers with their amazing and kind of majestic beauty, as you can see right there. And together with St. Elias and Glacier Bay National Parks in Alaska, as well as Tatshenshini-Elsik Provincial Park in BC, we are part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the largest internationally protected areas on the planet.
You have such a beautiful backyard, Erin. I'm so envious.
I'm very lucky.
Now, Erin, I understand that with Parks Canada, you have something called a field unit that you're a part of. I was wondering if you could let us know a little bit more about what a field unit is and what exactly your role is with Parks Canada.
Absolutely. Well, a field unit is a managed area, generally with an operational hub, based around region and geographical makeup. There are many, many field units across the country, and they can include protected areas, national parks, and historic sites. And they all meet national guidelines managed by Parks Canada. So here in the Yukon field unit where I am, we have not just Kluane National Park and Reserve, but also, as you can see right here, the Chilkoot Trail National Historic Site, the SS Klondike, the Klondike National Historic Sites up in Dawson, and Vuntut National Park. So my role you were asking about, here in Kluane, I'm very, very lucky. This year, I've had the privilege of coming on to the role of Public Outreach Education Officer. This role is held by somebody permanently, an amazing person who's on leave right now. And for this summer, I get to step into their shoes. I'm so lucky to get to do that. Prior to this, I've worked as a heritage interpreter for the park, and I have enjoyed that as well. It's joyous, good fun.
How did you get so lucky to be in the role that you are in today? What does one have to do? For instance, we've got some younger viewers out there to be in a role like yours in the future.
Absolutely. Well, to get started, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it is luck. I'm immensely fortunate to be here. Prior to working as a heritage interpreter in the Yukon for Kluane, I had a role as a teacher. I taught kindergarten and grade 4 in Manitoba in a town called Flin Flon. And prior to that, I had quite an interesting series of, maybe I think we should call them jobs. I started out in service, and I've worked as a tree planter and a fire ranger. I've had numerous roles, probably too many, and they reveal my age if I list them all. But after my teaching degree and throughout getting my teaching degree, I kept being drawn to roles in nature. I took a lot of coursework in environmental sciences, even though I didn't intend to teach them, just for my own passion. And I've never been able to let go of the dream of working in nature, in the outdoors, and just being able to advocate for wildlife and the natural world. So I am possibly the luckiest person I know for getting to be here.
Thanks for sharing your journey of how you got there with us, Erin. I know that there's probably so many people out there that wonder how that they can do the same and get to a position like yours. I know that Parks Canada does a lot of research. Would you be able to let us know a little bit more about the types of research that Parks Canada is doing in your area in the Yukon right now?
Oh yes, there is a lot of research happening, which is wonderful. Some of it is done in partnership with universities or external bodies, other research groups, and within the park there's an ongoing ecological monitoring program. That's what I'll be able to give a little bit more information about. Ecological monitoring, you can think of it as a checkup for the park. The same way that we would go to the doctor if we wanted to know how healthy we were, a good checkup would have the doctor looking at more than just one part of you. They would want to talk a lot and learn about how all of your systems were doing. It's the same with ecological monitoring. The park looks at more than one ecosystem, looks at 3 in this particular park, because Parks Canada has a legal mandate to maintain or improve ecological integrity, meaning the health of the land and water. And so here in Kluane, they are studying, I believe we've got a handy-dandy graphic, or monitoring, I should say, freshwater, forests, and tundra. Now that 83% under freshwater, I should break down, 80% of that freshwater is frozen in the ice fields. Only 3% of the park is freshwater in a non-frozen state, but a lot of life depends on that freshwater. For the park's total area of 22,000 kilometers squared, that 3% is home to some amazing species, and a lot of monitoring occurs there as well. As you can see from this graphic, the park is monitoring wood frogs. We might have a beautiful little picture. Lovely amphibian. And do we have their calls on hand? Fantastic. So those are some wood frog egg masses. And they are, when they go to monitor frogs, they are listening for this. That's about the gist of it. It does sound a little bit like quacking. What that is the mating call of male wood frogs. And so every spring, the park goes and listens, hip waders on, to the same 17 ponds every year since around 2009, I believe. And what they're studying is the presence of frogs in the park. So the park is also monitoring kokanee salmon and lake trout. And there's some spawning salmon and a beautiful lake trout right there. And the area glaciated, as well as river water quality. There are so many stories that I could share about the monitoring of freshwater. I know that the kokanee salmon in Kluane are the only naturally occurring kokanee population in a national park in Canada. And they have an amazing origin story I might tell you later. So much research continues with their population because their monitoring rating is in the red. So when a species is monitored, they get a rating that's kind of like a grade. Red is when things are maybe not going very well and there's some problems the park needs to learn about and pay attention to right away. Yellow is sort of like doing all right, yeah, things are still okay. And green is, oh, things are good. That's great. So the kokanee, it's a bit like a traffic light. The kokanee are in the red as well. Now, if we were to go up a little bit and enter the boreal forest in Kluane, which represents about 10% of the park's total area, the park is monitoring beautiful moose and around the Duke River area as well as the Oriole area, and forest breeding birds. Roughly 150 species of birds have been observed in Kluane, and of that 150, oh, a black-capped chickadee right there for you. 118 actually nest in the park. So in June, resource conservation staff get up well before the crack of dawn and head out with some really interesting multi-directional omniscopes and recording equipment so that they can record and identify birds. This is exactly what they're looking for, in particular, not just yellow-rumped warblers, but songbirds breeding in the park. Even though it's very early at that time of day in the Yukon, it's full sun already, so they get to enjoy some beautiful morning light here. We also, within the park, there is monitoring happening around the area that is burned, the forest structure and forest composition. From the mid-90s to the early 2000s, there was a spruce bark beetle epidemic, and on average, it killed about 44% of the mature spruce in the park. This has had a lingering effect on the structure and composition of the forests, not to mention the potential risks related to a lot of standing dead trees. In the park's alpine tundra, if we were to hike even higher in elevation, the park is monitoring Dall sheep and, oh, beautiful, mountain goats, plant diversity, shrub extent, and growing season change. Dall sheep are found in mountain ranges from northern BC all the way to Alaska. And across their range, Dall sheep, their population are down roughly 21% over a certain period of time, which is a concern that there may be some broad-scale change happening in alpine tundra ecosystems. Along with mountain goats, Dall sheep are considered one of the bellwether or indicator species of climate change in alpine ecosystems. And Dall sheep are also quite an iconic Kluane species. They're on one of our postcards, and they're highly valued by Kluane First Nation and Champagne-Inasiac First Nation. Let's see. Oh, there's just a lot of counting going on. I asked some resource conservation officers if they could give me something they really want people to know, and they said, well, there's a lot of counting. It's more than that, and they're being modest, but.
And I know, Erin, you were talking a little bit earlier about how Kluane National Park and Reserve isn't quite at the Arctic level. It's subarctic, but that the research going on here has such important implications for Arctic research. I'm wondering if you can share with our audience a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So while we're not within the Arctic Circle here in Kluane, we're in the southwest corner of the Yukon. Because we are home to the world's largest non-polar ice fields, a lot of the research happening has to do with thick sections of ice disappearing and the impacts of climate change. So very similar research occurs within the Arctic, where the problems are the same. Temperatures are getting hotter than we are perhaps ready for, and we're seeing some similar effects. Absolutely.
Out of all the research that's being conducted by Parks Canada and Erin, I know there's a lot. Do you have a particular research project that resonates really closely for you that you're the most interested in or care the most about?
All of it. Absolutely all of it. I remain endlessly fascinated by this land and inspired by it, and to learn about it is such a huge privilege. If I had to pick, and it's brutally hard, as a water-loving person, it for me would be a tie between wood frogs and kokanee salmon. And for wood frogs, part of it is that as a child growing up in Manitoba, I loved to play with them. I now know that we should not touch them, but that's why they're so fascinating as a subject for monitoring. Wood frogs breathe through their skin. Their skin can kind of absorb water and oxygen, so they're really sensitive to things like chemicals, oils, pollutants, and contaminants. So if there's something wrong with a freshwater area and there are wood frogs there, they are the first to know. They're also amazing because even though they freeze solid in the winter, when they hibernate, they make their own antifreeze, which I believe is a glucose that protects their cells from getting hurt by being frozen solid. I couldn't freeze myself solid and survive, so I am in awe of wood frogs. The other species that is near and dear to my heart, and that I find the research endlessly fascinating. This is close to their spawning grounds here. This is Sockeye Lake in Kluane. They're the kokanee salmon. They were brought here kind of by, well, they're here because of the action of a glacier. There they are when they're spawning. There's a glacier in Kluane called Nachudai, which is a Southern Shoshone word that I might have butchered, I'm sorry, that means fish stop. And Nachudai is a surging glacier. We sometimes also call it the Lowell Glacier. And about 5 times over the last 3,000 years, the Lowell Glacier has surged into Goatherd Mountain, which has cut off the Alsek River from reaching the ocean. So the Alsek River is a very long river that goes all the way from Kluane to the ocean. And at one point in our history, sockeye salmon had come up the Alsek River ready to spawn and done so. And the Lowell or Nachudai Glacier surged into Goatherd Mountain. And so those salmon who were on the other side of it, they spawned, and when salmon spawn, they die, so they were fine. But their eggs that became fry and little salmon, they couldn't reach the ocean because the glacier had blocked the way to the ocean. And salmon are brilliant, and they knew that they needed cold, deep water, so they found their way to Kathleen Lake or Matatanaman. And now they spend their entire life in the Kathleen Lake freshwater ecosystem, and they're very special. We're the only national park with a naturally occurring population of kokanee salmon. And because the park has been monitoring them since the 70s, the park knew when they got into trouble at some point. In the early 2000s, their population, which has always been a sort of a up and down, boom and bust kind of wave or like a bouncing ball, it sort of skidded. And instead of coming up during an expected boom phase, it stayed low, 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 low. And in 2009, there were actually only 20 spawning kokanee. And this is amazing and scary. And it's so good that the park was there counting and paying attention to that, because what happened is at one point, they made it so that you cannot catch and keep kokanee salmon in Kathleen Lake. Now they're a catch and release fish because they're in the red. And hopefully this is buying them an advantage. So much research is happening around the subject of kokanee right now and has already occurred. I could not possibly do justice to the research or the researchers. But two things that they're studying that is amazing is their genetics, because they're able to compare their genetic material with the genes of kokanee from the 70s. Science is just getting crazy and amazing. And they're also studying the sediment content of the creek they spawn in to see if there's something in there that could be part of the issue. We still don't really know conclusively what caused them harm, but they remain protected here, and I hope they stay with us.
Erin, thank you for sharing about all of this research that Parks Canada is doing and about some of the research that really hits closely and home to you. Why is it so important to study and research the world around us?
There's so many reasons that it matters. We are so connected globally. We are so ever increasingly connected and aware of our connection. I'm going to butcher the person's name, but there is a Senegalese writer who, I believe their name is Baba Dioum, who wrote at one point, we will protect what we care about. When we learn to care. It's a mistranslation, I'm sure, but the gist of it is that the more we know about something, the more we're able to connect to it, and the more we care about something, the more we'll get up in arms if it's in danger. So this really matters. And one thing that, especially in a northern subarctic area, so close to the north and so much a part of the north, we're seeing the impacts of climate change in the north in a blatantly obvious and measurable and concerning manner. Glaciers and ice fields cover almost 80% of Kluane National Park and Reserve. We know that in the last 50 years, the area with glaciers on it, the area glaciated, has decreased by over 20%, and over 230 small glaciers have disappeared due to climate change. One really good graphic I can give you to sort of show, this is the Kaskawalsh Glacier here in Kluane in 1898, and we'll show you it in 2018 if we could. As you can see, it's in the past 50 years especially, it's really shrinking, as many glaciers are. What happened with this particular glacier has really affected this part of the world. In 2016, the Kaskawalsh Glacier, right at its end right there, has for hundreds of years had two sort of meltwater pools, and one of its meltwater streams was feeding the Kaskawalsh River, and the other was feeding the Aichu River, which feeds Kluane Lake. And if you can just leave this graphic up for a second, you can see that in 2013, there's clear, obvious evidence here that the Aichu River is feeding Kluane Lake, the largest lake in the Yukon, and that in 2016, that river is gone. If I were able to show you a photo taken this year, that small island you can see in the 2016 picture is now almost entirely surrounded just by dry land, because the lake is down much more than 12 feet, and it's quite a concern. What happened is that during a really warm spring in 2016, those two meltwater channels combined, and the flow was just sent down the Kaskawalsh River. Water will go where it will go, and it could no longer make it down the Aichu River, and so the Kluane Lake's biggest source of water disappeared. And now the Aichu River Valley is kind of a dust bowl. It's very dry. There's a tiny bit of water in it still, but not much. And so much dust is blowing through there that it's coating the plants and landing in the lake and being breathed by the people. So some research is happening there right now. But it's something that we can't really ignore, because events like this kind of stream capture have not been common since the last ice age. And the expression "at a glacial pace" used to mean going very slowly, but now it can't mean that anymore, because if change happens at a glacial pace, change needs to start happening as quickly as the glaciers are leaving us. For those of us who do not live in the north, it's important to know this and understand this, because the world is a closed system, and what affects one area will affect all in time. But I remain hopeful. I know that we have a lot to learn, and even though we're seeing some very serious climate change situations here in the Yukon, it is still, as you can see from this video made by my fantastic coworker Fitz, it's still a place of incredible beauty. And in the past 100 years, human beings have made such incredible leaps of intellect, of technology, of accomplishment. We have everything we need. We have all the tools we need to address this problem. We just really need to start addressing this problem. And when I think of how passionate the youth are and the young people in my life are about focusing on this and being active around this exact topic, I feel hopeful and very inspired. I know we can do it.
Thanks, Erin, for sharing that and for sharing all the life around you and how it's being impacted by the changes that we're seeing around the world today. A lot of us don't actually see those changes. And to go back to something that you mentioned, really in order to understand or be concerned about what the changes are doing in the world, you have to know about them, and you have to experience them, you have to see them. Can you let our audience know a little bit more about why, even if you don't live in the Arctic, it's important to protect it, because those changes aren't just happening in the Arctic. Those changes are actually making changes for us here, for example, where we are at Science World here in Vancouver. And that's going to affect our local ecosystems, not just the Arctic ecosystems. Can you let us know a little bit more about how that happens, or the audience a little bit more about how that happens?
I will do my best. As I say, the world is a closed system. And so when we talk about losing large amounts of ice and changing where the water goes. As you can imagine, the people who depend on Kluane Lake for fishing and the salmon who depend on Kluane River, which is fed by Kluane Lake, they are very affected because when water changes and the land changes, if it happens really quickly and we aren't ready for it, we lose what we need. And so within the oceans, we are already seeing really high sea levels and they continue to climb. It is related to the melting of the polar regions. And when those sea levels rise, it actually changes our weather. The ocean is part of how weather systems function. And as ocean temperatures get warmer, big scary weather happens more and more often. And that kind of weather, like hurricanes, can really hurt people, hurt wildlife, hurt marine life. And we're seeing more and more of this. So when we talk about climate change, yes, you can see it in the Arctic right away. And yes, the ice is disappearing. And here in Kluane, we're looking at it and being like, oh, wow, look at this massive change. Maybe it's a little different in a city in the south of Canada, but we're on the same planet. We breathe the same air. We need the same things to survive. And as some areas begin to lose those things or have those things become in danger, people are going to need to do what plants and animals do, and that's going to be very difficult. So my hope for us is that we start to really focus on climate change research and action.
Well, thanks, Erin. That really helps to kind of connect us to how, for instance, we here in Vancouver, living next to the ocean, could be affected and quite quickly by those changes that you're first seeing in the Arctic. We can experience that here too, because as you mentioned, we're all kind of part of
Arctic.
Yes, that one global ecosystem. Can you let our audience know a little bit more about what they can do, even not living in the Arctic, to help the beautiful Arctic ecosystems that you've been sharing with us today out, and really in the end, all of us out, because we're all connected?
Absolutely. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak to this because it can be defeating. Anytime we talk about environmental realities these days, or what's happening with climate change, what's happening in the world, it is easy to look at all of the hard, challenging, and sometimes pretty scary things that are happening and say, I don't think I can do a thing. I don't know. And to get sad and to lose that hope. But that hope is really everything. It's not all we have, but it's a gate to all we could have. And so things people can do, there's little things that matter a lot, like riding your bike instead of driving if you can, to reduce your carbon footprint, choosing to maybe eat a little bit less carbon intensive food, or maybe a little bit less meat if it's something available to your body and your life. That's really important. They sound like small things, but if they're done by millions of people, they're powerful things. And when you get a little older, for adults who are watching, of course, this may be by rote for most of us by now, but staying aware and keeping connected with our leadership. Some of the decisions that happen in places like Ottawa and Washington have a massive impact, not just on places like the Yukon, but the world in general. So making sure that we stay as responsible and engaged with those decisions as we possibly can, advocating for the change we need, reducing our fossil fuel consumption, maybe making sure that government listen to First Nations and listen to scientists so that they know more about how the land is doing. These are really important things, and there's so much more. I'm just scratching the surface.
And a great first step is actually just our audience, right, joining us today and finding out a little bit more in the first place about the Arctic and about some of these issues that are happening and affecting us all. I'd like to that regard, actually turn it over to the audience a little bit more at this time for any questions that they might have, audience out there, about the Arctic. If you have some questions about anything that Erin shared with us today, or even in general about the Arctic, you can type those into the chat. Just as we're giving a moment for our audience to do that, I know that I have a question that goes back to something that you just let us know a little bit more about, Erin, and that's what do you mean by carbon intensive food? Like, what does that mean? If I'm gonna pay attention to all the pollution in the world, and you're saying my food is somehow polluting that, what do you mean by that?
That's a great question, and some of these answers I have to answer as me because I can't speak for everybody. I can't necessarily speak for anybody but myself on this. However, I think that it's widely accepted that a lot of our food comes from very far away, especially here in the north, and we don't have a lot of choice about that. But there's a wonderful documentary called First We Eat, I believe, about a family in Dawson City, Yukon, who chose to eat as locally as possible. And it's worth a look. Doing our best to eat locally when we can makes it so that less big trucks have to bring us what we need from other places, and local farmers growing food get our support and our money so they can keep going. Also, with eating protein like, cows, as delicious as they are, when we can reduce how many meals that are super protein intensive or beef intensive, we are doing the environment a small favor, because there is a certain amount of carbon production that goes into livestock raising, and small things like that can be helpful. Although if you're a beef farmer, please know that I thank you and there's no judgment here.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that, for one person to do all of these things is probably not realistic, but as much as we can do to do some of these things goes a really long way in making an
Yeah,
impact and helping out.
absolutely. It can feel like a gigantic storm that there's no possible way of weathering. But there's going out with a whimper, and then there's going out with your head held high. And so, depending on how you feel about the situation with our climate, the small things matter. They matter, in terms of how we respect ourselves, acting in this current place and time. And so the small steps like riding more and being careful with your dietary choices when you have the privilege of doing so, those are absolutely worth it.
The audience is wondering just a little bit more about what is your favorite part of your job, or your role right now, living in this beautiful place that you're showcasing behind us right now.
I wish I could show you more. My favorite part of, well, I have to acknowledge that I'm very, very lucky. I have a great deal of privilege just getting to be in this place and see what I see and be near the mountains. My favorite part of my job is learning about the wildlife and learning about the land, and allowing myself, when I have the opportunity to be out in nature, express gratitude there, let it connect me to that pulse of life on earth. Being in nature is a gift, and I cannot recommend it enough at all.
Ling is asking about the amount of warmer days in the Yukon, and in particular, he's wondering the warm days that you have. I mean, I think first of all, it would be great if you could share about just in general the warm days that you have in the Yukon. But then he's asking, is it increasing or remaining the same? Right, as you've been talking about climate change.
Thank you, Ling. I appreciate your question. It's We are seeing some strange climate situations in the Yukon for sure. This particular winter, we had so much snowfall that we're actually experiencing some flooding in the Southern Lakes areas in the Yukon. It was pretty unprecedented. Our winters are certainly warming. I know that temperatures in the Yukon have increased by 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the past 50 years. We've definitely had some hot days this summer, but we're also seeing over the past few years, occasionally we'll have summers that almost seem coastal in that they're not particularly warm, but there's tons of rain. And that is not typical of the area. It's usually a bit drier. So we're seeing coastal climate situations sort of move in to this part of the Yukon every now and then, and that is part of a changing climate as well. Yeah.
Right, so not just that climate change doesn't necessarily mean things are getting warmer.
Yeah.
It means that the climate is changing in many ways. Certainly, warmer can be part of that, but that you're seeing different changes of the climate in different places.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Michael
I see.
asks, are there a lot of bears where you are?
Well, for me, it's never enough. Bears where I live in the Yukon are we're lucky. There are black bears and grizzly bears. Grizzlies here are known as shosho, and they are very, very special. I adore every opportunity I get to see a bear. Within Kluane, it's estimated that there's between 80 and 100 black bears. Although bears are transboundary, they go in and out of the park. They don't really care what we put on maps. They go where they can get food and feel safe. And for grizzlies, it's very hard to know an approximate between maybe 190 to 200 and some. There hasn't been a study on grizzlies in Kluane since the 90s, and I know that the park would really like to see one happen, but that it might need to happen with a partnership or a university. So if there are any bear biologists out there, your presence would be very welcome, I suspect, here. Grizzlies here I see probably several times a week. Right now they are eating berries on the trails, especially soap berries in this neck of the woods, and they're just a thing of beauty. If you're hiking here or if you're coming up to the Yukon to hike, you want to make a lot of noise. Maybe carry your bear spray with you, and if you're not sure, stop in at the visitor center and talk to one of the park staff.
So a lot of bears in your area.
Oh, well, again, it's never enough. I just adore them. But yes, we are lucky. We definitely live in bear country. And Kluane's grizzlies, when there was research done, it was learned that they are one of the most genetically diverse populations of grizzlies in Canada.
Erin, we're coming to the end of our event time today, but I thought that just before we go, you can let the audience know a little bit more about where they can go to find out more about Parks Canada's research, a little bit more about the area that you've been telling us about.
Absolutely. If you were listening today and you were thinking, I'd really like to hear more what she said about, doll sheep or wood frogs or any of it, my email is up there. And if I can't answer it myself, I'm lucky I can reach out to some of our resource conservation team and see if we can find your answer for you. The website there, pc.gc.ca/Kluane, is the main Kluane page. On that page, you can find out about how to plan your visit, learn a little bit more about various aspects of the park and the field unit. And the link under there, where it's pc.gc.ca and eventually Kluane/nature, will take you to a page with information about ecological monitoring so that you can get some more of the nitty-gritty than what I was able to touch on today. You can find links on that same site about geomorphology and wood frogs and kokanee salmon and all that is happening within the park. It's well worth a look. I hope it makes you want to come for a visit. And speaking of coming for a visit, if you are able to come on up to the Yukon this year, here in Haines Junction, Dakwakata, there's a beautiful cultural center, the Daku Cultural Center. It has a Parks Canada Visitor Center office, the Yukon Government Tourism Desk, and also perhaps later or in future times, post-COVID, if that's coming soon, the Champagne and Ajax First Nation has a visitor center in there as well that is absolutely worth your time.
I know that I would love to come visit you, Erin, at some point when we're able to do so. But like
Please do.
Audience, you can find out more in the meantime by those links that we popped in the chat, or even by contacting Erin there at her email. If you'd like to join us for another event, you can visit us on our Science World Eventbrite page. But I can't believe it. We are already out of time for this event. So what we're going to do is wrap up and say a big thank you to you, Erin, for joining us
Thank you.
today from the Yukon and letting us know a little bit more about that beautiful area that you live in and that Parks Canada is studying. And a final thank you from us all, from Erin, myself, from Brian and Madeline, our studio
Thank you
techs,
so much.
to you, audience, for joining us today. We hope to see you again. Until next time, bye, everyone.